About who I am. I was one of these fortunate people to grow up with a very compassionate father. One of the conversations that I really remember him giving to me was that how at that time the sisters and daughters were responsible for taking care of the family, taking care of their elders. And he had a problem with that. And he shared that with me that we also as men have a responsibility. I grew up in a very caregiving culture family in that my parents brought in my grandmother into their home, later brought in my great aunt. On the other side of my family, we also brought in young ladies who had complicated situations. So I grew up believing this was normal, believing that I probably am doing things just because that's what we do. It was not until I met AARP and became a volunteer that I truly understood how to make this efficient and how to make it effective. And being an effective caregiver has become very important. I also learned that as we prepare to care and as we have a plan, we actually help our loved ones, and most importantly, we help ourselves as well. Now, in this session, we're going to talk about the 5 steps that AARP endorses to actually create a caregiving plan. I'm certainly hoping that we will also connect with other family caregivers, and you will also share tips and information. And feel free to put anything into the chat room that you might have questions you want to respond to. And most importantly, you're going to learn about resources that are available to you. Now, I want to say that it was most important to me as we begin, and I'm trying to advance here. But as we move forward, and I'm going to come back out and come back in to see if we can actually pull this up better. But I'm also going to interject most of my comments that I've learned on my own. And that's going to be, as a male caregiver, what's unique. And as we talk about the plan, you're going to see in our AARP guide, and we'll give you this website again, exactly the contents of most of the preparation that we have. And to begin with, let me say that one of the things that I've learned, we are all in some kind of way a caregiver, whether you're providing emotional support to someone that you care about, whether that's a neighbor, whether that's a loved one, whether you're part of the companionship issues and just being there for someone. And we're juggling many things during the day, and we're going to talk about how that could be also pretty tiresome for you. But if you're providing household tasks, whether that's cleaning, whether that's bringing dishes to the home, you're a caregiver. The personal care issues, and we're going to talk about how personal care issues as it affects men can be completely different from women. Whether you're just simply offering to pick up someone's medication, whether you're buying food or you're cooking a meal or bringing food over, or even helping someone to pay their bills. The point here is that we're all caregivers. But the question is, are you prepared to be an effective caregiver? And when we talk about are you prepared, what are the tools that are specific to you that you must know in order to make sure that it's working for you? In my case, I mentioned being a male caregiver was something that I needed to learn more information about. One of the things about men as caregivers, we tend to have a weak support system and a support networks, and we're less likely to seek out programs such as AARP or such as conferences like this. And we increasingly want to make sure that our caregiving capabilities are being wisely used, and we are getting support for those. And I think as our male culture, when I was growing up, men basically did not have these opportunities and were not encouraged to say, I need help. When we assist with personal care, it can become very stressful. And as a male caregiver, as I said earlier, we don't utilize the support and training that we have available here. And that's one of the reasons I'm so happy to be a part of this conference, because it gives us a chance to talk with each other, to network with each other. And we also understand through research that long hours of care provisions are more stressful for our male caregivers. Now, our male caregivers are increasing. We currently have about 16 million men, and that's about 40% of our caregivers are male. So it becomes essential to people like me to understand what we must do because our culture is changing. And what's really nice about the process is that male caregivers are demographically a very diverse group, which means we have men of all ethnicities, all ages who are into the process. But more than 1/3 of our male caregivers do not tell our employers that we are caregiving, but we often always take time off from work due to caregiving. Now, this is an interesting problem because, number one, we don't know how to have these conversations. I myself had never had a conversation with anyone about caregiving as we know it to be. But after becoming a caregiver, I have found that everyone has a situation, whether that situation is watching our parents, watching our grandparents become caregivers, or whether that is knowing that a neighbor is being taken care of. And because we don't have these conversations, it's not something that we talk about at work. And ARP has another venture to where we actually work with employers in creating that avenue to have conversations at work and to create a caregiving work culture and the advantages for that. We also know that male caregivers report that we will do whatever is necessary for those in our care. Primarily, that's because we're taught to solve the problem. As men, we take care of the situation. And one of the things that we learn when we as men want to take care of the problem, in my case, I have my aunt who lives with me. And I'm learning that when you're talking about cognitive issues, it's not an issue that you take care of, that you resolve. It's an issue that you must change daily, weekly with to meet the different demands of the issues of Alzheimer's. And for male caregivers, positive emotions often coexist with feelings of isolation, stress, and strain. And this primarily happens because we also aren't accustomed to talking about our emotions. Now, let's talk what we're going to do today.
Okay, it doesn't work. Yeah.
We're going to, let's all mute ourselves. And the first thing we're going to talk about is how do we start that conversation, which is very difficult. Once we start the conversation, how do we form our team? How do we make a plan? How do we find support? And most importantly, how do we care for ourselves? And as we begin into the ARP 5 steps, let me say that the first part, which is the most difficult part to begin with, is how do you start that conversation? Unfortunately, we don't grow up thinking that we might have elders or loved ones who might become incapacitated or who might not have that hero stance. And we also don't grow up as elders thinking that we will need care. So that conversation is very important. In my case, it was basically picking up signs from the neighborhood because I was unaware when I first began working with my aunt, what's old age versus what is Alzheimer's. And that's a conversation and another resource that I had to learn. Once I was notified by some of my father's best friends that they have been doing certain duties for my aunt, I began to get into how do I begin this conversation with her? Actually, it was a case where my sister and I and one of her sons actually met with her to say, we're noticing these things. How can we get some type of assessment done? Now, this was our opening. And fortunately for us, when I first began to think about the assessment, excuse me, it was going to take about 4 months for me to actually get her in for an assessment here in Houston. However, her position was to let you know that I'm okay. I'll do an assessment here in my hometown at the local hospital. When we finally had that assessment, my aunt was moved by one of her children, and that assessment fell through. So we finally began to go through a complicated process when you have a nephew looking to take care of his aunt, and you actually have two siblings who are available. I wanted to make sure throughout the process that I respect my loved one's wishes. And when I talk about respecting loved one's wishes, that's because however we see them as changing in their behavior, we must realize that they're still adults. They're still the people that we respect. And in my case, with the women in my family, very strong, very opinionated, very progressive. So I had to make sure I worked with their personalities as well. And how do you begin sizing up that situation? What do you do next? And when we talk about bringing someone into our care, it's important to review the finances. We must understand their bank accounts. We must importantly understand what are their PIN codes. Are there any investments that we need to organize? What is the insurance coverage? And when I say insurance coverage, we're going to have a Medicare and Medicaid session later in the day. I encourage you to also listen to that because there are different insurance coverage requirements from Medicare versus Medicaid, and there are requirements and legal requirements and medical requirements. So we must understand which program are they in and which program might they fall into later. Other finances, assets, and incomes. We often forget that they might have a lease or mortgage note or rental agreement. So if we're talking about housing, we need to make sure that we have all of those finances available, because we also need to understand early that we might reach a point where we might need to talk about power of attorneys. We might reach a point to where they may no longer be able to share this information with us. So very early, we want to begin in that conversation to review the finances. Now, be prepared for them being resistant. In both of my cases, and I have my mother who's 3 minutes down the road, I have my aunt who lives with me. Initially, they just weren't prepared to talk about this. And if that's the case, you be prepared to be patient. And you also might need to understand that it may not be you who needs to initiate that conversation. I have my mother's two best friends for over 40 years who work with me with her. My aunt and I grew up together as in fact, I consider myself the first child. So I know a lot about her personalities, but I have her best friends in her hometown who also work with me. You have faith leaders. It might be another sibling. It might be another relative that you must call in. Now, we've talked about how do you start the conversation. The next step is how do you actually form your team? When you begin talking about forming your team, a question that comes up a lot to me is, well, I'm one sibling and my brothers and my sisters aren't helping. And we have to, first of all, realize that that team may not be family. It could be friends. In my case, I also involve my children, my friends. It gives you an opportunity to look at who can be helpful in the process. Now, when we talk about team members, we say check with people who live nearby, who can assist and come by and can help you. But let me say, it's almost as important to have people who aren't nearby as well. In my aunt's case, one of the ladies that my grandmother moved into the home, who considers herself my aunt's younger sister, lives in California. Just the phone calls that she's able to provide is extremely helpful to my aunt's mood. Just someone who's different from your voice, being able to say, I'm just checking in on you, telling her some of those favorite stories. It might be people who can help with simple tasks. One of the things that I found out with my aunt is that she really enjoys the old pineapple upside down cake. So I have a friend who makes pineapple upside down cakes. Simply bringing one of those over every now and then is extremely important. Some of the younger individuals who have talents with the computer, we send regular emails. My aunt gets to read what's going on with her great grandson. It's important that once you have your team, that we also look at how do we build support for our team. You will need to determine how many people you need. It might be a few, it might be more. And that number is going to change as well, because you're going to have some team burnout. You're going to have some team schedules that might change, and that's okay. Expect those kinds of differences. And when we talk about assigning roles and responsibilities, what do I mean by that? Some people are simply those folk that can bring uplifting conversations. Some folk are those who simply give me a break. Others might take care of the doctor's appointments. Others might take care of getting the families together. Others might want to do other kinds of things that are helpful, and those will change. You just want to be organized with your people that you're working with. Most importantly, especially at the early stages, focus on the care recipient. And we're going to say this often. And when I talk about focus on the care recipient, remember I said my aunt really likes the pineapple upside down cakes? I ask her early on, while we can have these conversations, what kind of food item is one of your best snacks? Most importantly, because I know that her organs are going to begin to change, her appetite will change, her need to eat will change. I also wanted to have a conversation with her, and I thought I knew the answer, and I was correct, but it was important to ask her the question. If you begin losing your language ability, as we all do, as I said to her, through aging, if you're in a group situation and you're losing your words, do you want me to kind of help you out? Or do you want me to give you time to speak on your own? And she said to me, give me time, because I can speak for myself, which is very important and which is very her. If we go to the doctor's office and there's paperwork afterwards, and they might have a tendency to give it to me, I learned very early that that offends her, that she would rather them give the paperwork to her. Now, after a few minutes, I might say, I have my folder here. Would you like me to keep them for you? And she will say yes. Now she automatically gives them to me without any problems. So when you focus on the recipient, you know what they want, you allow them to be part of it. And if you have someone who just really wants you to make the decision, you know that if you're talking with them. We talked about how do you have that first conversation? How do you begin the idea of putting together a team? And now let's talk about what's your plan? And that plan is very different based upon the circumstances. I've actually had to research the stages of Alzheimer, the different types of dementia, even looking at personality differences and personality disorders, simply because you have complicated relationships when you might be caregiving. Is it a situation where you didn't have a good relationship growing up, and you feel now that you're the one who must be the caregiver? How do you deal with those situations? So that plan involves you making sure that you do your research, know what you're dealing with, and you meet with your caregiving team. I say frequently. In my case, we tend to have meetings over dinners, when I might invite one of the great grandchildren over to just have dinner and allow them to get to know the aunt that they may not grow up knowing. When you meet with your team, it's important to talk about what are the goals, And what are the needs for your plans? Do we agree with these kinds of things? And when we said earlier, focus on the recipient or your loved one, everybody may not be appropriate to be on the team. If they're going to stress out the care receiver, this is someone that you may want to just give updates to and not have them come around if there are memories that aren't as pleasant. And for those people, you want to make sure you take good notes. And taking notes on what you're doing is extremely important. In my case, I am aware that circumstances are going to change. I'm aware that if I don't keep people up to date, they're going to think, but we talked about and we planned. And I have to consistently change how I think. As I said earlier, as a male and as very much a caregiver, and trying to understand the differences between caregiving and enabling, I want to make sure that I am thinking about my care receiver. It's not what I'm going to do and how I'm going to keep things organized. It's about what the care receiver needs. And these notes are very good because you're going to have to refer back to them. And at some point in time, the family will not always agree with what you're doing. So your notes will help you to explain to them why we're moving from plan A to plan B. And that should always be based upon the needs of the care receiver. Now, when we talk about our team, again, as early as possible, include the person who will receive the care. Again, we want to include them so they know what's happening, but it's more important to get their opinion on what would you like as far as housing. It gives you a chance to look at different types of housing, find out what they like, find out where they would like to be. In my aunt's case, at 87 years of age, will soon be 88, she's able to climb 3 flights of stairs without a problem. Her language skills are still extremely good. She wants to be involved. When I take her out, it's important that she sees people because it gives her a chance to be that kind of person she wants to be. And she knows that they don't know she might have memory problems. So she gets to let them know how good she is, how she will often say, well, I still swim. I still ride my bike. And in her memory, that's exactly what she does. Now, we want to make sure that, again, as your care receiver's involved, you get some of the answers to the questions that you might need later when you may not be able to get that information. You want to keep everybody informed of the plan. Here again, an example is my aunt really wants to donate her body to science. Her grandson prefers that she donate organs. So we have something to use at a ceremony. I'm leaving that up to them to decide. I'm going to do what my aunt decides she wants to do. And now's a good chance for I call him my nephew. He's really my second cousin, but I want him to be a part of that process. And it's also important that you delegate responsibilities. And that I learned because you really can't do it all on your own. You really can't do it by yourself. And we're going to talk later about how do you care for yourself. But you want to delegate responsibilities simply because this is not going to be an easy task for you. Now, step 4, how do you find support? And I'm talking now support for your loved one, support for your team, and support that'll help this process to be better for you. There's so many community resources. This is actually one of those community resources, sessions like this, where you can talk with other people, visit conferences. You've got care partners. You have this agency. You have the Alzheimer's Association. You have ARP has Mindful Mondays, Technology Tuesdays, Wednesday wellness courses, all online where you can actually learn. I take notes, and all of these workshops, all of these resources are very helpful to me because they improve my abilities to be a better caregiver. Professional help is always available. Professional help is generally about $20 to $25 an hour. In my case, I actually share the responsibility of professional help with a neighbor who's in a very similar situation. He's with his mother. I'm with my aunt. They enjoy getting together. There is a healthcare worker who we share, sometimes them together, sometimes alone. That works out for us. And I mentioned earlier about the culture of a workplace. Many of us have employee assistance programs that are helpful, whether that's something that we have where we work or something where your care receiver may have had where they work. And look at those possibilities because they are also very helpful. Now, when I talk about resources, one of the things that I had to learn was what is compassion fatigue? And to me, I always assume that we're just talking about burnout. We're talking about stress. But one of the things I had to learn that compassion fatigue is that physical and mental exhaustion and that emotional withdrawal experience by those of us who care for sick or traumatized people over an extended period of time. We deal with issues such as death and dying. We deal with knowing that, in my case, this situation is not going to get better. You find yourself dealing with some unknowns, some very well established practices of what's going to happen. I realized that my aunt, who was one of the most invigorated individuals growing up, is going to become very different very soon. So I needed to understand about compassion fatigue and needed to learn more about how to get help here, whether tired, whether I'm looking at my home. As she begins to become more part of her cognitive issues, is my home safe for her? ARP also does what we call home fit, where we have an opportunity to survey your home accessibility. She likes to go into the kitchen. Is my kitchen safe? Is it set up to where she can relax in the kitchen? Do I have rugs that appear to be safe now that may be, as her mobility changes, unsafe? So we want to look at all of the ideas of securing our home, making sure that her room is safe for her. And we also, at this time, might want to look at exploring housing options. I foresee myself being able to house my aunt for quite some time. I don't know how it's going to look later down the road. I don't know if she will need care that I can't provide for her. But I can certainly now look at all the different options that are out there. Now with my aunt, I basically say, let's look at this facility because I might have to get it from my mother. For my mother, I say, let's look at these facilities because I may have to get it for my aunt. That's easier for me. And I want to say that caring for yourself is not only important because we always say, care for yourself. You can't be a good caregiver without making sure that you also are someone who, once you take care of yourself, you can be a better caregiver, but you can also live longer. And I was actually talking about this point in the presentation of ARP once, and I thought, oh my God, I'm not doing what I'm telling everybody else to do. My eating habits were off. My physical health was off. And I actually chose to pursue the idea of getting a therapist, which is one of the best decisions I've ever made. And someone who I can always call at any time, schedule a meeting if I need to. So I found myself in a situation where I was trying to be a good employee, a good caregiver for my aunt, a good caregiver for my mother, a good father for my children, and a very good friend for my ex-wife. And at the same time, trying to make sure that I was keeping up the house. I believe in volunteering in certain parts of the neighborhoods in Houston. And I was not being the kind of person that I really wanted to be. I was not that kind of person that I knew I could be. And I was juggling too many things. So being able to talk with someone about this is what's going on became very helpful for me. And something I will always talk about. And when you look at how do you become resilient, we're going to talk about our own self-awareness. What's going on with us? What are we doing? What do we want to do? We spoke earlier about having plans and goals set for our care receiver. What do we want to do for ourselves? And most importantly, I also learned, we're going to talk about mindfulness a little bit later, but I'm not sure I knew what mindfulness meant when someone mentioned it to me until I became a caregiver. And how do I reach back into my mind, myself, and simply relax? What kind of self-talk am I giving myself? And I know the kind of person that I used to be, the kind of person I want to be, and I want to stick with that plan. I'm proud of who I am, and I want to be true to the self that I am. It's important to look at your positive relationships. I realize too that I also want to be a good father. I want to be a good brother. So how do I keep my other relationships going while I'm trying to be a good caregiver? And what is my purpose? So all heavy kinds of questions that we ask ourselves, but very important once we get into the business of caregiving. Now, when I talk about what are the bears in your life, let me give you an example. If you're out and you see a bear headed towards you, what do? Do you stop? Are you still? Do you think about picking up something and being prepared to fight? Do you run? Let's look at this as caregiving. Are you a caregiver for a recipient with a severe illness? That could be a bear in your life. Have you overextended your work and personal obligations? Are you concerned about your personal health? Did you just find out that someone you care about has a positive health notification? Or did your supervisor just leave you a message asking you to call her ASAP? So all of these things can present stress, can be a bear. And what do you do and how do you handle it? Because again, it's important to care for yourself and care about yourself. And as we know, those of us who work in the business and who are caregivers, it takes a lot from cooking and cleaning, managing medications, looking after finances, managing doctor's appointments. Doing it all for someone you love can be rewarding. It can be purposefully in your life, a very good thing, but it can also cause fatigue and feelings of guilt or worry. Remember the bears. How do you respond to the bears in your life? These are all the bears. One of the ways you respond is you simply take note, learn how to breathe. I'm one who also has high blood pressure. So I find myself, I've been kicked out of many dentist office because my blood pressure is too high for them to do the necessary work. So I have taken my breathing from being mindful to also breathing to lower my blood pressure. And you must practice and change the way we respond to our bears. Because if we are not prepared to be that calm individual, not prepared to keep our body, our heart, our brain, our body healthy, everything that we do as caregivers can be something that will affect us in our life with our body, that affects our family as well. And when I talk about mindfulness, it's basically us being aware of what we're going through, accepting what we're going through, and living in the moment. When I talk about awareness, it's that knowledge and ability to focus attention on one's inner processes and experiences, such as what's going on with me right now. We want to be aware of that. We want to acknowledge that. And we accept what's going on with us. And that is the ability to observe and accept rather than to judge or avoid those stresses of thought. If we simply accept it, we are working on our breathing. We have an opportunity to simply relax, set up our plan, and move forward. That's going to reduce our stress level. Extra stressor. Now that we have COVID coming back and still present, how do we take care of that individual who we might live with or may not live with? When I have an 88 and a 90-year-old care receivers, I must be conscious now about their health. I must make sure that the care receiver that I don't live with is well taken care of, is not going out, making sure we're doing the masking, making sure that we also look at what kind of plan do we have in place because of COVID. We want to make sure that we maintain their personal care and their personal maintenance. Now, tips to find support. If there's anyone who has a question, or if we have someone in the chat who'd like to say something now, or we can wait until it's over with, I'm hoping that we can share what do you do that works? What is it that you're experiencing? And we have many ways that we can actually find answers to that. Again, I want to talk about employer resources. If there's not a conversation where you work, if you're still working, you begin that conversation. You'll be amazed at how many people on your workplace are also dealing with some of the same kinds of things that you're dealing with. Why not suggest to your employer that we have maybe sessions every now and then where we can talk about resources. We can bring in someone like AARP. We can talk about what's available out there for us. It will also give the employer an opportunity to talk about where we are, what we can do to assist, and if nothing else, open up lines of communications to where I can go to my boss. I can say, I'm a caregiver. I actually am very fortunate. I'm an adjunct professor at the University of Houston downtown, and we have aging issues that we openly talk about, social justice issues. Now we even talk about voting justice issues. So it's a place where it's a very open forum to have a space to share with each other. And that's something else that AARP provides. So if you have an employer or a company who wants AARP to talk about how you can create a more employer-friendly surface and space, let us know. When you're looking for help, we have the Employer Caregiving Toolkit. We have what we're doing here, the Prepare to Care workshop. And most of what I'm talking about, the workshop, you can download and you can actually have access to this information. We also have information as how we can support caregivers in the workplace. There's so many resources that you can find through AARP that will help you with what you do. We have the Spanish versions, the Asian versions, the LGBTQ versions. So it comes in all different flavors. Our website, aarp.org/caregiving, as you can see here, is something that you will find most useful. We have what we call the Caregiving Financial Workbook, which assists you in getting your finances and your care receiver's finances in order. What do you do? What should you do? And what do you do once you know your financial situation? The Prepare to Care guides that you can download. You also have a resource line that you can simply call, and that number is 877-333-5885. That's the kind of situation where if you just need to talk with someone, we have the group forums, chat lines, all focused on caregiving. I have found this to be an incredible resource to me. We have instructional videos that focuses on training family caregivers, caregivers resource guides, live and recorded webinars, and even in part because of the pandemic, we have online resources such as you're experiencing now, the different sessions that you can simply from your home office, from your bedroom, wherever you keep your computer and you do your Zoom calls, you can simply learn what other people are doing, learn how to improve your skills. And I would say one of the most valuable pieces that I've come across, we have the AARP Family Caregiving Facebook group. It's a private group that is incredible. I joined the Facebook group, and here's one of the Facebook posts. It says, I'm new here. What can I say? My mom is 78. She still lives in our family home, and I've not been able to move her into a smaller place. She has a 4-wheel walker, and it does not fit in my car. I've had depression, OCD, and anxiety since forever. My brother took his life about 15 years ago. I had to call 911 about a month ago because my mom had an infection. I just picked her up, and I'm now trying to figure out my next steps. She lives 30 minutes away from my home. I'm not sure about her medication, and I have no idea if she has or has not taken her pills. My husband needs to work, but I'm with my mom, and he's taking care of our 15-year-old daughter and our cat. I also have a 30-year-old son, his wife, and their 2 children. I'm so full of anxiety. My husband has 2 parents, and they live behind our home. I'm trying to make an appointment with my psychiatrist. God help me. I have no idea what to do next. You have people after people who feel very comfortable in expressing these kinds of issues, expressing this type of need. The responses were from, I have a similar situation. This is what I recommend. This is what I had to do. And oh my God, I'm praying for you. And this was kind of a Facebook post that I stumbled into. You have people been able to be very frank, very honest, and you have the real situations that we don't talk about in many of our sessions. We talk about the positive, what you can do kinds of things. But in the Facebook post, it provides you that opportunity just to be raw and real. And I actually, from the Facebook post, there was an article about the complicated relationships that I mentioned earlier, where it speaks to what do you do if you're dealing with someone who either has a personality disorder, someone that you did not have a good relationship with. I met one individual who says that she was a daddy's girl. She and her mom did not have a good relationship. Dad is deceased. She's the only child. She's trying to be a good caregiver for her mother. Her mother is a narcissistic personality. So how do you deal with those situations? All of this can be addressed in our Facebook post. When I mentioned our caregiver resources earlier, just a little checklist. Page 27 of that booklet, Prepare to Care, talks about the home maintenance checklist. Page 30, your medication chart, which helps me with every doctor I go to. I travel with my mother's medications, my aunt's medications list, my list of medications. And it's organized in such a way that our health providers really appreciate it. The financial checklist, what are those kinds of things you need to know? So you don't have to think of this on your own. And what is your caregiver plan? So all of this is provided free of charge by AARP. So I ask that you take a look at what we have there. Here again, contact AARP for assistance with caregiving. And at this point, I want to say thank you for joining us. And I'm hoping that you have some questions. I hope that we can have some conversations about what your needs are. And I'm going to come off screen here. and get your point. And I'm looking for my stop sharing button.
No, you won't have a stop sharing because you're not sharing your presentation right now. So you're good.
Okay, super.
You're all good. So if somebody wants to chime in, this is an opportunity. We have a few minutes left. This was amazing. Really, really good. I got some really good nuggets out of it. I agree with you. These online forums or Facebook groups like you were talking about with AARP, super, super helpful. Because you get people in there that are going through the same kind of stuff you're going through. And they can also often give you some hints of what they did that maybe worked. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I know there's some people have put some comments in the chat. What was that number that you gave for help? I'm going to type it into the chat for everybody because somebody wanted to know that.
All right, and I'm going to back up and I'm going to get that number. It's going to be, number one, you can go to our website line, which is houston@aarp.org. And the telephone number that you can go to is going to be 877-333-5885. Again, that resource number is 877-333-5885.
And I just put it in the chat as well. So if you need that information. So
excellent.
Okay, anything else? Does anybody have any questions? You can unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can put it in the chat, whatever's most comfortable for you.
Asking about the links for the online caregiver groups. Would you mind repeating where they could find that information?
Yes, one of the places that you can find the caregiver groups will be looking at our Prepare to Care guide, which is aarp.org/prepare to care. We also have, again, the Facebook private group. That one you will have to go on Facebook, look up Facebook ARP private group, and you will ask to be a member of that group. And they will simply verify that you are a caregiver, and then you become a part of that group. So that's just searching on Facebook for the AARP private caregiver group.